Welcome back to the Arts Department, everyone. I'm Autumn Rain Turkel, and this video is the basics of pixel art in Photoshop. There are a multitude of applications that you can make pixel art in, some targeted specifically to doing pixel art. I use Photoshop because I'm familiar with it, and I've used it for a number of years, and it is a faster workflow for me. That being said, this video isn't sponsored, it's just what I do. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome to Photoshop. First thing we're going to do is we're going to do a new document. We're going to set that document to a resolution of 72. Make sure that your drop down is pixels, and then we're going to set the width to 50 by 50. And then we're going to create a document. So you can see that it's very small to begin with. So you can either click the Z key to get to your magnifier, or you can click on the magnifying glass in the tools palette. Your tool palette might not be here. This is just the way that I set up when I work. It may be over here, this side. So click on the magnifier and zoom in. The important tool is going to be the pencil tool, which is hidden below the brush tool in your tools palette. So click and hold the brush. You can see that you have 5 options here. We're just going to go with the pencil tool, and we're going to set that to a size of 1. Now you can make it bigger or smaller if you want. You can do that here, or you can use the bracket keys on your keyboard to increase the size one step at a time until you get to 10, and then it goes by 5 increments. All the way back down to 1. Secondary to your brush tool is the eraser tool. So you can click on the eraser over here, or click E on your keyboard if you have the default keyboard shortcuts. And then what's really important with the eraser is to change it from brush in the tool options palette up here down to pencil. So now when you erase, it's going to erase a pixel or whatever size you have set it to. So once we have all of our tools set, we're going to click on our new layer in the layers palette here. If you don't see that, you can go to window, click on layers, and this window will pop open, and then you can move it around the window as you see fit and dock it wherever you want it. Do you see how that blue appears there? You can put it pretty much anywhere you want, but I tend to have mine set there in that layer palette. Click on the new layer icon there. Another way is to go to the options here at the top, this little drop down, and go new layer, and then you can name it, and you can set the color of it, and you can set the mode of it, and all of these things, but we're just going to leave it as is for now. So we'll delete that using the delete icon and go back to our first layer there, and then we're going to go to our color palette, and if you don't see that, click on the window and go to color. And we're going to select all the way down in the corner here so it's 100% black. Then on that first layer, we're just going to start drawing. And we're going to keep this very simple. It's going to just be black pixels on a white background. It's actually on a transparent background. Now if I was to turn off the layer lock and show you, you can see that this grid behind here indicates that that's transparent pixels. So we're going to turn that back on and go back to our layer, and we're just going to draw in some interesting shapes to get us started. And this is where you're just keeping it simple, looking at the silhouette and doing what you want to do. This is where the art in pixel art comes from. You can switch to the eraser and then erase out some of those pixels to get a shape that's most pleasing to you. And I want to do something that's, I don't know, a little more interesting. So let's do a character, like a D&D character, because I like Dungeons and Dragons. But we're going to stylize it. And remember that you are working back and forth with the eraser and the pencil or brush to find a shape design that's pleasing to you. And with pixels, it can mean the matter of 1 or 2 pixels that change the overall shape of an object. So it's little tiny movements will go a long way for you. So that silhouette's starting to work, but I don't want to have to redraw this exact curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my lasso selection tool. And sometimes it'll be the polygon and sometimes it'll be the magnetic. Just go to your lasso tool unless you want to do very straight lines. But when you're working with pixels, because you're working with such a small form, it will snap. So if you watch, this is the normal lasso selection tool, which doesn't normally do straight lines. But because it's pixel art and it's so small, watch when I let go of this. See how it snaps to the pixels? It's very interesting. So we're going to turn off anti-aliasing up here in the toolbar. And then we're going to copy and we're going to paste in the edit menu at the very top, edit, transform, flip horizontal. Switch to the move tool by pressing the M key, and then we're just going to drag it so that it actually works and these pixels are aligned. So once you do that, you see that with that new layer that was formed when I pasted. So now we're just going to drop that down by holding controller command and hitting the E key. You see how it merged those 2 layers up there? So now that I have an interesting kind of shape, I'm going to drag this silhouette down to the new layer icon, and it's going to duplicate that layer. Alternatively, while you have a layer selected, you can hold down controller command and hit J, and it will duplicate that layer. So we're just keeping that layer as a backup, just in case, so that we have something we can go back to when we need it. So now within that layer, you have 2 options for coloring here. Well, this is Photoshop, so you have a multitude of options, but I have 2 ways that I go about this. Occasionally, I use the lock transparent pixels command. So when you click on that, it's going to lock the pixels, but you'll still be able to paint into those pixels, but you won't be able to paint outside of those pixels. As an example here, we'll pick this green color and we'll paint. And you see, even though my brush is going outside of those pixels, it only paints inside the pixels. So any pixel that has any data on it will be painted, even if there's some sort of transparency. You can use that to your advantage quite frequently. So I'm gonna hold controller command and hit Z to undo what I did. And I'm gonna show you another way. So I'm gonna unlock those pixels, and I'm gonna create a new layer, a new blank layer by hitting the new layer icon. I'm gonna hold Alt or Option, and you see how my cursor changes when I do that? As long as I hold it between the 2 layers. Then we're gonna link those layers. And what that means is this layer now will do the same thing that the locked layer did earlier. So anytime that I paint, it's only painting in the layer below it, in the opaque pixels. Do you see that? So if I was to unlink those, you can see where I was not very careful with it. What this does is it helps you to maintain your silhouette, but it also takes away some happy little mistakes. Like that could be a very interesting back to this shape. What this does afford you is the option to use color changing effects. So with this layer selected, we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation. And when we click on that, this little dialog box comes up. And you can see that you have hue, saturation, and lightness. So they are basically what they sound like. Hue will change the color. So if I wanted to go, maybe he has a red cloak on, and that doesn't seem that red, so we can adjust the saturation and make it more red. You'll notice that this color and this color are not the same. And that's because what it's doing is it's taking the base color that you started with and it's altering it. If you wanted to specifically target that color, you could go to Colorize, And what that's going to do is it's going to alter the color based on the hue slider alone. So you can see that as I move it across the slider, it is exactly the color of where I'm moving it to, right? So if I want that red, there you go, that is a red cloak. And I can make it darker or lighter down here. So let's bring that saturation down. Let's put this back into maybe some greens, because most characters that have a bow and a cloak are going to be some ranger characters in Dungeons and Dragons. So we're going to make this a middle value. Let's go more into the blue-greens. I like blue-greens. And that looks good to me. So now we're going to add in some more shapes here. And again, this is the art part. This is where you're just playing around, doing whatever you want to do to design and make something. And a lot of this is personal preference at this point. This is just the shapes that I felt like making and the character that kind of came out as I was playing around. I'm going to make another layer, and I'm going to link that, and that will paint over the layer below it. So remember that everything in the layer stack, anything that's above these is going to appear over them in your actual canvas. So if I was to go, let's say, lighter over here, you can see that it paints right over everything below it. And you can use that to your advantage like anything else. You can also use it to take a layer, and if you drag it below a linked layer, it's going to automatically link over here. So let's put some skin tone in for this guy. We're going to move this over to something around here, and let's see how this turns out. That looks okay, right? And we can very quickly just shift those hues and values a little bit and put in some shadow shapes and some indication of some form here. So now let's color this bow real fast. Let's go with a dark brown. We're just going to put that in, and we're going to put that in, and then for the string, we're going to make it gray. There we go. Now I think we can have some more green, like in his boots here, and we can make it even darker on the very bottom. Maybe a little too dark. So you can see at this point, it's really just playing around. It's finding some colors and tones that you like and just putting them in there. You do want to follow some principles of art, know where your light source is and that sort of thing. And it'll help you to flesh out the character. So I'm just doing a light from above, right? So it's pretty simple. Just putting these little pixels in place and having some shadow and having some light. And for this cloak, put another layer of kind of darks to indicate more shadow. And then let's shift it ever so slightly and put in some indicators of a body in here. And this is where the design comes in. You design it how you want to design it. And nobody gets to tell you that you're doing it wrong, because it's art. And art has a lot of forms. So as I said in my other videos, it's only wrong if it's wrong for your objective. So if you know your objective and you're reaching towards it, then you're doing it right. Within these shadow shapes, you can just nudge the color a little bit on your color palette and kind of put some textural elements in there. And you can do the same with the lights, where you have a little bit of variance in the lights. You see that? It's not much, it's just a little bit. But overall, it will add a lot to the experience that you see when you finally look at the finished product. Another way to do that is to get a layer over it and turn on your opacity setting here. And what that's going to do is, if you're using a pressure tablet, not a mouse, it's going to actually paint with opacity, which means that you can easily change the colors a little bit just by painting as if it was a painting. So if I pick a lighter color there and come in, you can see that there's a little bit of transparency to it, and it's showing what's underneath. So let's take his skin tone there, and his hand is outside holding that bow. Make sure that when you're going back, when you are not painting with opacity anymore, that you turn this off. And now you're going to be painting 100% opaque. So this is with it on, where I can, if I press harder, I get more and more opaque. But if I let it go, you can see the difference there. Versus with that off, now it's 100% opaque every time. Another way to apply shadows and light would be to do a multiply layer. So what I can show you is if I add a layer here and link it, and then go to my lasso selection tool, or press L on the keyboard for lasso. And then let's say I wanted to make it darker here. You see how it just snaps into place? So now, go back to my pencil, and let's pick like a blue color. And we're just gonna paint that in. And that's 100% opaque. So now when I deselect it, it doesn't really look that good. But if I go to the layer mode here, in the layers palette, where it says normal, and go to the drop down, you can see that you can change the way that the pixels interact with the pixels underneath it. And then you can set it to something that looks good. So I could go multiply, but that doesn't necessarily look good unless I go over here and turn the fill or opacity down. Right? Now it looks kind of like a beard. But I could also go to something like overlay. And what that does is that takes that blue color that we have and interacts with the orange color underneath to get this interesting interaction there. So I like that. In fact, I like it so much that I'm going to put a little bit of that color elsewhere. Because now that the overlay setting is set, it's going to overlay over everything there. And you can easily create shadow shapes and alter what's there using that overlay. And I can do the same on the cloak and the body. And you can see that there's actually just a little touch of blue in there. And so it gives you some more variance in your color. It makes it a little bit more artistic and a little bit more interesting. So one more layer, we're going to add in some real nice metal looking stuff real fast, just to pretend that this guy has some metal on his outfit. And that's also just part of the design aesthetic. Let's put a little here. There you have it. Now you'll notice that I'm zoomed in 2800% or more, and that I can see the pixels, right? So if I go and I zoom out a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, there you go, the pixels disappeared. And that's what the art looks like. But if you look at the navigator down here as you're working, you can keep it zoomed in and see your pixels, and also see what it's going to look like near the end. That being said, when you have your magnifier selected, you can click 100% at any point and it's going to make it the actual size of the canvas. And that's the actual size of the canvas. I recommend saving it now at a pixel size so that if you want to come back, you can edit it later. So we'll call this Pixel Ranger. Say OK. So now that that's saved, you can go up here to Image, go to Image Size, keep Resample on, and this drop down here is the way that it's going to interpret your resize. So go to Nearest Neighbor, Hard Edges, and once you've done that, you can look at pixels here and you can set it to exactly what you want it to be as far as the pixel size. Let's make this 100 pixels. It's still pretty small, isn't it? But now, every pixel that we made is 4 pixels. So let's undo that, but if we go back, you can see that they're all single pixels. And you can come back and do all the work that you want on it, and you have all these layers that aren't flattened so that you can work on it. It's non-destructive editing. So let's go back and do image size again. But let's make this, let's go with percent, and we're gonna make this 600%. That's only 300 by 300 pixels. Now, on the web, something that's 300 by 300 pixels is not that big. and it most certainly is not going to print out for you. If you want to do something that prints out, you're going to have to do 2000 pixels. Make sure that your layers are, your proportions are constrained to one another, and both of these will go up in value. So now, there you go. And if I go to print size, it's just going to fill the window. Now this, at 2000 pixels, will print. And you can see that we still have very crisp edges here. But look at how many pixels that is. So now I have one that I can print at any point, but I also have one that I can open up and edit at any time and then make it big again to print it. Okay, that's it for Pixelart. Real simple video, just the fundamentals to get you started. We'll do some more later. So if you like what you see, and if you found some value in the video, like, subscribe, ring the bell, and get notified next time we post something up. Check the About section for social media, as well as other links. You got Instagram, Twitter, ArtStation with resources for artists, the Discord where you can connect after hours, and Twitch. We go live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 1900 hours. Come on by, join the discussion. We'd love to have you there. That's it from the arts department. Keep drawing, and we'll see you next time.